Now there is undoubtedly a lot of issues with Hypixel Skyblock. Issues that cause some players to stop playing the game, but for the majority of players, issues that simply aren't big enough to stop them from playing the game. 97% of people watching this video will have played Skyblock and probably do like it to some extent. But that doesn't mean to say that we can't talk about the problems with Skyblock at the moment, and also potentially how we go about fixing them. I asked in my Discord server what everybody thought was, well, the biggest issue with Hypixel Skyblock, and I've got a massive variation of responses. So I think it's time that we take a look through those responses and have a little chat about them. So the first response that we're going to take a look at is Lowballing Scammers. I wonder if this is referring to just generally people who lowball and basically make money off people, or people who actually run scams through lowballing. Now, in my opinion, while I understand how people can get annoyed with lowballers, I mean, all you have to do is go into a populated hub and your chat gets absolutely spammed with people advertising that they're lowballing. This one's actually quite tame. At the end of the day, each to their own. If you can make money through lowballing, great. And if you're in a situation where you've got an item that you want to sell very quickly, that usually takes a long time to sell, then sell it to a lowballer. Sure, you're going to get less money for it, but at least you've got some money. As for lowballing scams, I guess people get scammed all the time through trade menus. I've not personally heard too much about lowballing scams, but let me know in the comments if you have. Alright, the next one we've got is inflation. Now the issue we have is that there's always going to be some sort of inflation with the way Skyblock is. I mean, all you have to do is look at crops, and the majority of these crops that you can farm, people always sell them to the NPC because they're always, well, more expensive to the NPC than they are to the bazaar. There's only a select few crops, I believe it's cactus and maybe one other, that you're actually better off selling through the bazaar. If you're selling things to the NPC, it's essentially printing money. So I think that basis just sets up a baseline level of inflation that you're always going to see. I know pet skins at the moment are particularly inflated, especially obviously the older ones. The older a pet skin gets, the less there are actually in circulation. Less unapplied skins there are, more people who stop playing the game with the pet skins. You know, the prices are naturally going to increase. At the moment it's actually kind of insane. There are some pet skins that aren't listed that are worth over 30 billion coins, which is mad. You know what, a little bit of inflation isn't necessarily a bad thing, but I guess on certain items at the moment it is kind of crazy. I guess the thing you've got to think about inflation is if something rises, then majority of the time most other things rise, meaning that what you actually do to make money usually increases too. So even though it might seem like you're paying a lot more for an item, at the same time, majority of the time, you're going to make more money from what you're doing to make money to get that item. It's not always the case, but majority of the time that's how it works. But before we go any further, at the moment we're actually trying to beat the population of Andorra with subscribers. The population of Andorra is around about 80,000 people. Once we reach 80,000 subscribers, we're actually going to visit Andorra and we'll be able to claim that we have more subscribers than the population of the whole country, which will be pretty cool, so make sure to subscribe to make that happen. Also, if you are planning on purchasing anything from the Hypixel store, make sure to use code NITROS, it gets yourself 5% off. You join the Discord server, it's linked in the description of this video for slayers and dungeon carries, so if you need carries or want to carry and make some coins, make sure to join. Balancing being so horrible that they had to straight up exclude classes from parts of the content. For example, melee only used when it's forced or super buffed with crimson armor. Archer either does 2mm DPS or 200mm DPS depending if the target has immunity frames. Mage obliterates everything, dominates even if you don't have hype. Midas staff ability stacking, massive AoE, but obviously gets heavy nerfs against bosses / mini bosses and can't hit some mobs. Then poor balancing limits their ability to add new content, like tier 5 slayers, for example releasing tier 5 revs, when hype was already thriving, would just make that slayer boss meaningless because it was too OP. I agree with the balancing, because for instance like melee is just ain't it. Something needs to be done massively about melee. We'll touch on it more later in the video, but just in general. I guess with the imminent buff to Crimson Armor, making it so that it doesn't work with mage abilities, I mean, I guess that kind of maybe balances it a little bit better, but still doesn't really add anything to melee. Lag? Honestly, this is completely and utterly dependent on where you're actually playing Skyblock from. The further away you are from, well, the servers, which I believe are in Canada, the worse it's going to be for you. I mean, that's if we're talking just in terms of ping. And that isn't going to change. Could potentially change if they move Skyblock or Hypixel into a later version of Minecraft and they set up multiple servers that are still connected, because that is a possibility, but yeah, that's not going to change anytime soon, and it is an issue. The RNG system, I can never get good stuff. I'm going to blow your mind. It's just random. It's luck. It can be frustrating if you do a lot of, I don't know, slayers or dungeons or even something like Kudra and you simply are not getting what you want. But for majority of things like dungeons and Kudra and even Nucleus runs now, there is literally a pity system. There is an RNG meter. And of course, the closer you get to filling that meter, the more likely you are of dropping the item. And of course, you're guaranteed an item drop once you fill the meter. Now, sure, that's not ideal. It takes a long time to do. But I personally don't think the RNG system is actually that bad at the moment in Skyblock, because for the majority of things, at least you are guaranteed a drop if you do enough of, you know, the certain thing. Then again, it is really annoying, very annoying, when you just simply, you know, can't get what you're looking for. I know the situation all too much. I've metered 4 hearts, I've metered an overflux. You know, it's horrible. How the game communicates progression to the player. I think the issue with that is progression looks different to every player. Well, sure, there's going to be some overlap with people at similar stages in the game and wanting to do the same things. But think about how bad progression communication would have been before the introduction of Skyblock levels. Yeah. I can't quit, please, I want to stop. Honestly, that is actually a big issue. People getting genuinely addicted to Skyblock. And I don't think that's a Hypixel or a Skyblock issue. I think that's just an issue with people who get over-obsessive with games in general. I enjoy playing Skyblock just as much as the next person, but if it gets to a point where it's taking over your life, it's not worth it. Yeah, no, in all seriousness, like, your well-being is over the game, and if you feel like you're addicted, and, you know, it's not good. It's really not good. If you're turning down, you know, going out in real life or doing things to play Skyblock, you just shouldn't. It's just not how it should be. For me, the best experiences for me when I'm playing Skyblock, and when I seem to enjoy it the most, is when I've not played it for a while. So if I've taken a break, and I come back to it, and it just seems so much better than it really is. Obviously, Skyblock is a grindy game, so you've got to put hours in if you want to see progression, and there's nothing wrong with doing that at all. But if you're staying up for days upon end playing Skyblock because you want to, I don't know, get this next trophy fish or reach this next Slayer level or whatever it is, then it's not worth it. I mean, it's my livelihood, but it is just a game. The balancing, also some requirements for items aren't logical, just the build of Skyblock in general. Now, we've already talked briefly about the balancing, and we'll touch on it a bit more later. The build of Skyblock in general, now, there's another comment that kind of expands on that, but I'm going to mainly focus on also some requirements for items are not logical. Because this is very true, very true. For instance, take an item like the Juju Shortbow. To craft the Juju Shortbow, well, it kind of makes sense. You've got some enchanted string, you know, string for a bow makes complete sense. And then just a handful of other items that released, you know, when Enderman Slayer was introduced, you know, things like Null Voids, and obviously Quartz and Eyes of Ender weren't introduced at that point. They were always in the game. Well, this craft for a Juju Shortbow makes complete sense. However, if we take a look at something like the Terminator, now it's clear, it's obvious that the Terminator is a direct upgrade from the Juju Shortbow. At the time when both of these items were introduced, they were the only 2 Shortbows in the game, and they required different Enderman Slayer levels to unlock. Now, of course, the Juju Shortbow got increased. It used to be Enderman Slayer 3, and it's now 5. Terminator has always been 7. So, basically, if you wanted a Shortbow, if you weren't Enderman Slayer 7, but you had the Enderman Slayer requirement to get a Juju Shortbow, then you'd buy a Juju. And once you had the money and Enderman Slayer requirement, you upgrade to a Terminator. So it only makes sense to me, at least, that you would need a Juju Shortbow in order to craft a Terminator, because it's a direct upgrade. Now, everything else is fine here, like, no blade's fine, you know, a Tessellated Ender Pearl's great, a Judgment Core makes sense, you know, you want an expensive drop to bump the price up. But there definitely should be somewhere where you have to put a Juju Shortbow in this craft recipe. To me, it only makes sense. I mean, for all I care, you can just simply replace the braided griffin feathers. It makes a whole lot more sense putting a Juju Shortbow in this slot here than griffin feathers. I don't know. You know, there's other examples as well of this, but I feel like that's just one of them. Okay, most people kind of went for a bit of a bigger picture sort of situation. It has to be like the fact that it's so hard to charge thunder in a bottle, or something like it's way too easy to scam someone just for inflating prices on the bazaar. Okay, so there is market manipulation on the bazaar. That's always been an issue, and yeah, I would say if you're buying something off the bazaar, always double, triple, quadruple check that it's at the right price. Thunder in a bottle has always been an interesting one for me. And just for simply charging it, you can charge a pretty decent premium. Now, I know a lot of people have them on them when they are doing mini-bosses in the Crimson Isles, because, is it Mage Outlaw, one of the phases, charges the bottles? You know, there's many other ways to do it. But yeah, it is a pretty interesting one. I guess they could kind of make it a little bit more intuitive and, you know, maybe just work a bit better. The lack of update. I kind of agree with this, and I also kind of don't. I'm not sure if this is so much a problem, but I think there's something related that is a problem. I mean, the lack of updates, there are relatively frequent updates in Skyblock. Just a lot of them probably aren't related to what you're wanting to even do in the game. They might not affect what you want to do in the game. And yeah. So at the moment we're seeing a lot of changes, so we're seeing a lot of updates, but they're not really introducing a lot of new content. It's changes to things that already exist. For instance, bug fixes, changing to armor like we've seen with Crimson. Sure, recently they added a few new items to the garden, although it wasn't anything massive. Now, for me, the last update that we had that I actually, really enjoyed was the Glaciate Tunnels. And that's because there was so much new content added. And obviously, I know it's not realistic. It's not realistic for them to be able to add something as big as this every, couple of months. But this was a ton of new content, and I really, really enjoyed it. The grind to Heart of the Mountain 10 was really good. All of the new, the new gemstones, the new ores that you can mine, the whole situation, the whole mechanics of the Glaciate Tunnels is just good. It just is. Like I said, I think at the moment we're getting quite a lot of changes, just not a lot of, massively new content. A real questline and story for new players to use as a progression guide. The game is still horrible for beginners. Now, I agree with the fact that there should be some sort of proper storyline or questline to Skyblock, because even though there is an ongoing storyline in very, very, faint quotation marks, most players don't know the storyline of Skyblock, me included. But that's because it's way too cryptic, and also it doesn't really impact the progression, of any player if you don't know the storyline. Cheaters. This is a problem because I guess cheaters kind of encompasses quite a few different sort of, people. You've got people who macro, you've got people who use cheats, for instance, like in dungeons, you've got people who scam others. I mean, that's cheating. And I guess you could even put ratters in that sort of ballpark as well. There's so many different things going on there, and it's so hard to kind of solve all of those issues. But I personally think that Hypixel need to actually be a bit more proactive on trying to come up with solutions to these issues, because I know that these sort of issues do drive a lot of people away from the game. For instance, if you happen to be ratted when you've put a lot of time into this game, a lot of people will kind of just call it quits from there. Now, some people will start again, sure. And of course, when you're playing Skyblock, when you're dealing with other people, you've got to have your wits about yourself. If something seems too good to be true, then it mostly is. It's a big problem, and it's been a big problem for a long time, but the issue is kind of knowing what to do to solve it. The thing is, people are always going to find a way, and if people get banned on an account, they'll just come back on another one. Wipes. Does this relate to people getting false wipes? Because I know this is pretty prominent, and a lot of time people don't get unwiped, even basically providing evidence of them not doing anything wrong. I know that's definitely an issue, and to be honest, I think that is more of a Hypixel issue, because essentially what you've got is a relatively small team working on a relatively big game. Even though it's not a game, it's a server. You've got relatively popular games out there at the moment that have a smaller player base than Skyblock, but they have a much bigger team behind the scenes. Now, what I've mentioned there about them having a relatively small team for a relatively big server/game is an issue that spans over a lot of different subjects. For instance, like the update situation, things like the foraging update. That saga's been going on for way too long. Just get it over with, release the update. As fast as you possibly can at this point, because it's getting to be just a bit of a joke. But they've got a relatively small team working on relatively large scale updates, also trying to manage all of the player base. For instance, looking at ban appeals, wipes. Have you wiped somebody in the right, is it valid? I just think with a lack of people, a lack of staff, because obviously they're a relatively smaller company, trying to keep the costs down, it kind of makes sense why people get wiped and not unwiped, even though they might not have actually done anything wrong. I feel like a lot of the time, maybe the process to review a wipe or a ban or whatever it is probably not really that in-depth at all. But I don't know that for sure. That's sort of the impression that I get at times. They keep promising updates to pre-existing content, but they never deliver. I'd say that is pretty valid. That is true. Let's think about some of the recent updates. And when I say recent updates, I mean the most recent big introduction of content, not just changes. So, for instance, like the Rift, there's support. There's 8 time charms. You can only obtain 7 at the moment, and you've always been able to only obtain 7. So why give the prospect of an 8th if you're never going to release that, further update to make it possible to go ahead and achieve the 8th time charm? Just make it so there's 7, or implement another time charm somewhere else in the game so you can actually make it obtainable. There's a whole mountaintop that you can't access. Yeah, that is definitely true. If we look at mining the Glaciate Tunnels, there's literally There's pets implemented into the game that were implemented with the introduction of the glaciate tunnels that are fishing pets that only work in the glaciate tunnels, despite the fact that you can't fish in the glaciate tunnels. That update's been out for months at this point, months and months and months. And I mean, there's got to be some sort of fishing update in the glaciate tunnels that would make it possible to use these pets that are already literally purchasable. You know, I could go on, but I don't think there's any point because it's pretty simple and I definitely plus one it. I think if they say they're going to release, or if they give the prospect of, you know, if they literally put a pet in the game for a certain activity in a certain place, then how is it that you can have that pet in the game but do nothing with it? You know, if that's something that you know is not going to be released for a while, why put it in the game? Just seems a bit strange. The same with the time charm. The difficulty gap in dungeons, I can run F6 easy, but I instantly die in boss fights in floor 7. I agree, you can kind of wing floor 6, but you can't really wing floor 7. And I think the gap is massive. Does that... I don't really know what they do to sort of solve that at this point. You know, that's the way it's been for a very long time, and I feel like changing it would probably just cause more problems than it kind of is causing at the moment. But I agree, 100%. You know, the jump from floor 5 to floor 6 is very, very minimal, but the jump from floor 6 to floor 7 is absolutely humongous. Kind of strange, actually, when you think about it. But yeah, I guess that's just the way it is. Is it a problem? Potentially. At this point, it's just the way it's been for so long. I feel like that is probably kind of a bad mindset to have. Lack of foraging update? Yeah. I'm not going to say anything else on this. Yeah. The horrible TPS, it makes the server bad. I agree. I 100% agree. The TPS situation is shocking. So if you don't know what TPS is, it stands for ticks per second. Basically, it kind of gives you an indication of how smoothly the server is running. So for something like Hypixel, the TPS should be at 20, or if not 20, the closest it can possibly be to 20. Maybe 19.9. Anything above 19.5-ish is genuinely fine from my reckonings. Anything past that then, you can kind of feel like there's something a little bit off, and when it gets much lower, it's unplayable. So for instance, through Super, you can do /TPS. At the moment in this hub, it's 19.7, which is fine. Now, the issues arise when you start going to the end, and also the Crimson Isles. The Crystal Halls can sometimes be pretty bad as well, but majority of the time it's the end and the Crimson Isles. Now, surprisingly at the moment, in this lobby, the TPS is 20, which is absolutely unheard of. You see, kind of the reason for this is there's just so much going on the end island that the server can't keep up. Potentially, you could have somebody doing a dragon, or an Endstone Protector, and at the same time, maybe 4, 5, 6 people doing Enderman Slayer. This takes a lot out of the server and makes it unplayable for pretty much everybody else, or anyone doing the Slayers, or the activity. Have you ever been playing Skyblock and it feels like you're lagging? And then you check your internet and it's not your internet. At that point, it's probably the TPS of the server. Now, ironically, both the End lobby and the Crimson Owls lobby that I've gone into have actually been at pretty decent TPS, which is literally not what it's usually like. I've been doing both Enderman Slayer and attempting to do Blaze Slayer recently, and it's been a bit of a slog, mainly because I'm bad at the Slayers, but also partially because the servers do not help. The community. I mean, this is going to be interpreted differently from player to player. You've got some people that play Skyblock who don't really, you know, join any Skyblock-related Discord servers, however, most people do. So I think already the experience of those two people with the community are going to be vastly different. You've got people who will be actively looking around lobbies to play with other people, and people who are fine with just playing the game on their own. And in that case, if you really do just play Skyblock on your own, and don't really talk to anyone else who plays Skyblock, then I guess this kind of the community issue doesn't really mean anything to you at all, which is fine. Now, personally, my experience with the community, the Skyblock community, I think is pretty good. You know, it just depends, you know, sort of what sort of people you surround yourself with. So, for instance, like, I've made a lot of really good friends on Discord. I mean, it sounds like the classical sad gamer thing to say, but I'm just saying it how it is. You know, I know a lot of people who are really nice and I get along with, and, you know, you just have a nice conversation about Skyblock or whatever else is going on, and that's kind of all you want. You know, I make YouTube videos and everyone's entitled to their own opinion, and there's probably quite a lot of people who don't like the Minecraft videos that I make, but at the end of the day, I'm not going to lose sleep about somebody not liking a Minecraft video. It's just a game. But I guess you've also got to think that in this community, there's also, you know, the bad sections of the community. So you've got people who, you know, rat people, scam people. You know, that is an issue. you know, it's an issue that there can't really be any sort of solution. I mean, with every game, you're always going to have people who play that game. Otherwise, you know, it's essentially not a game that people would be interested in. And you're going to get a variety of people. So I think saying the community is the community being an issue is kind of, it is generalizing, you know, people in the community. What you really need to do is take a look at the sections of the community that cause an issue. They keep adding more AFK content. I guess this is probably mainly in relation to what the chocolate factory. Obviously, there's more things been added. You know, if we go further back, that's AFK content. But yeah, I don't know whether it's necessarily. I mean, I think some AFK content is good. For instance, minions are inherently a good thing. Some of them are a bit underpowered, but yeah. It's a tie between term making dungeons make it look like everyone is the same class and melee weapon progression. Okay. I can kind of see that. Okay, so a lot of people use term in dungeons. Archers use term. Even if you go berserk, some people still use term. I guess maybe if you go tank, maybe you'll still have a term. So yeah, I think maybe the issue is that the Terminator is a little bit too overpowered for its own good in dungeons. And melee weapon progression is a massive issue. I've talked about it a lot in the past. But the issue is straight up the fact that most weapons aren't differentiated from the next. And what I'm getting towards is the fact that majority of melee weapons don't have a good ability or a good right-click ability. So the only thing that you can differentiate weapons between is the damage that they do. And it gets to a point where adding more damage to a weapon and calling it a new weapon isn't really enough. You need to add value to it through an ability. That's the main issue. If you look at the best melee weapons in the game, you've got Giant Sword, you've got Dark Claymore, you've got the Midas Sword. Now, two of them don't have a right-click ability, and the Giant Sword right-click ability is basically useless. You've got a weapon in the Valkyrie that's the most expensive melee weapon in the game. It's literally a purpose-built melee weapon that's a variant of the Hyperion, but it's not as good as something like a Giant Sword. So that's a big issue. That weapon needs to be buffed through the roof. It needs to be given a good ability. Maybe there needs to be another scroll that can be implemented to make that weapon much better, or something. Something needs to change with that. Melee weapons are a write-off, I'm not going to lie. They're not really used for that much either. If you're doing Slayers, if you're doing Zombie Slayer, you're going to use the Axe of the Shredded. If you're doing Blaze Slayer, you're going to use the daggers. If you're doing Enderman Slayer, you're going to use a katana. So there's no opening for any of those sort of melee-based Slayers to use a regular melee weapon, other than maybe Sven, where you'd use a Claymore. It's a bit of a mess. The fact you need mods to be able to play normally, it's not something I've thought about, but this is so true. Yeah, this is 100% true. Skyblock without mods is not a good experience. And I think a lot of players who are new to the game obviously won't think about downloading mods. They'll just play the game. Probably have a bad experience and not really know what to do. You need mods to play the game. It's as simple as that. Lack of fun content at all, especially mid to late game. I talked about that a bit before. You know, what you actually class as fun content is major updates, and there aren't too many major updates. There's a lot of changes, but not actual new content. And I guess when you get towards late game, a lot of the things that you're doing are kind of monotonous grinds. And I guess that's just the nature of the game. Okay, so the inflation and macros in the garden that cause inflation and suggesting how Hypixel can fix inflation and macros. So I guess there's two issues. The issues are the issue and how to actually fix the issue being an issue itself. And I think that's true. And we kind of touched on inflation before. Like I said, it's not necessarily a bad thing, but I think in the garden it is a bad thing because most people are going to sell all of the items that they get to the NPC, obviously printing money. So something could be worked out there where there's just simply a minimum price put onto the bazaar that items can be listed for in terms of crops. Therefore, it'll incentivize people selling those crops to the auction house instead of the bazaar. And I think in order to solve the macro issue, especially on the garden, because the garden is, you know, farming in general is probably the easiest skill you can think of to macro because it's simply just running up and down in a straight line, holding a button down. I mean, yeah, it's not like it is complicated. I think the only way to really fix that is a massive what you actually do when you're farming, and I'm not sure whether that will ever be implemented. Now, I'm not suggesting this, but for any people who have played Windcraft, the way that you farm in that game is completely different to the way that you farm in vanilla Minecraft or Skyblock for that case. It's almost more similar to the way that you farm in the Rift. It's more interactive. It's very boring, and I'm not saying this is the solution because I don't think it is. But I think something similar to that is the solution. In terms of making it way more interactive. But you'd need a humongous change to a point where farming is unrecognisable to actually implement that. Too little Jerry. Thanks for that, Rix. That was insightful compared to the rest. That's what I like to see. Yeah, we need more Jerry. And to finish off the video, we've got how hard it is for newcomers to enjoy and play the game. Now, for sure, this game is incredibly complicated, with very little context and very little guidance when you start to play the game. Now, going back to Skyblock's biggest competitor, that being Windcraft. I've not played that game for very long, maybe a few hours at most, but it literally walks you through what to do at the start. Now, of course, it isn't the same concept. It's not the same game. I guess you could say Hypixel is almost more open world, where Windcraft is maybe more comparable to something like a campaign. What you do in that game is much more rigid to what you can do in Skyblock. You can kind of do whatever you want. So maybe it's not the fact that there isn't, it is. So what you do in that game is a lot more rigid to what you do in Skyblock. Skyblock, you have a lot more freedom. You can kind of do whatever you want at whatever point in the game. I'm not sure if it should be as extreme as you can't move on to doing the next step without doing the last. Because it's not the same kind of game. But I remember, even when I started playing the game, something as simple as... it wasn't magical power back then, because the magical power didn't exist. But I didn't understand why I couldn't deal a lot of damage, and it turns out that I had like 2 talismans. That was the issue. But I didn't know that getting more talismans meant that I dealt more damage. Simply something that I didn't consider. Also, I just didn't know what talismans did. That's a level of confusion. Maybe it's a little bit easier for new players nowadays, because something like magical power, makes a lot more sense. You've got an accessory bag, you've got power stones, and so on. Now, for someone who's played Skyblock for a while, starting a new profile is actually quite fun. I feel like a lot of the fun grinds are at the start of the game, but for someone who's got no experience and never played the game before, it's very daunting and very confusing, and I feel like maybe more guidance should be provided, actually built into the game to those newer players. It'll probably see the player base actually, grow, because I guarantee that a lot of people who start playing Skyblock, they might start a profile, not know what to do, probably won't continue to play it. A lot of people come back to it after a few months, after they've maybe watched some videos or whatever it is. But anyway, that is all for today. Now, some of these problems aren't major problems. Some of these problems almost contribute towards what we enjoy about Skyblock, having something to moan about. But there are a lot of problems here that I think should be prioritised and probably fixed pretty soon. You'll have to let me know what you think in the comments. Anyway, if you enjoyed today's video, make sure to leave a like, subscribe if you're new, and I'll see you in the next one.